I hate the holidays. I don't celebrate holidays that are commonly celebrated, and I don't even want to name them because they insult me. And I'm not joking, I have experienced much trauma due to religion, and now I'm trying to distance myself as much as possible from religion and anything that is connected to it. What I practice now is the holidays that are more nature based. So things like solstices or equinoxes. These are the kind of celebrations I can get behind. I do celebrate the end of the season, usually at the end of October, beginning of November, and I do celebrate the beginning of the year, which usually comes at the end of March. And I love celebrating in nature. I love just coming to nature and dancing and enjoying the sun and giving thanks to nature for everything that it is. It is not easy to not celebrate common holidays because, people around you are going to want to congratulate you, and if you don't congratulate them, they're going to get unhappy. They might not understand why you don't want to partake in everyone's merriment and joy. And I don't want to talk to everyone about having deep-seated religious trauma. And I'm just gonna say that the phrase that religion is the opium of the masses has really helped me get over certain painful experiences of my life. And I am a very spiritual person, so when religions hurt me, it was devastating to my soul. So I am still very resentful and bitter about religions, especially monotheistic religions. But I'm getting over my bitterness and resentment by celebrating in a way that makes my soul happy. And I want you to consider the traditions. If you don't feel like celebrating a certain holiday, if your spirit doesn't connect to a certain practice, then why do it? Why not examine yourself and see what kind of seasons you actually want to celebrate in and what it is you want to celebrate? I think we have to be more aware and more conscious of our celebrations, and we and our families are the only ones who can decide when and how we're going to celebrate. Let's talk a little bit more about the holidays. I already mentioned that I don't celebrate many holidays because of my own previous relationships with religions. But I like to give an example on traditionalism using the short story The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. This was a very controversial story when it was published back in the 1940s, and it remains to be a good example of criticizing traditionalism. So if you're not familiar with this story, I'm going to spoil it here, so if you want to read it first, please do go ahead and do that. But in The Lottery, Miss Jackson shows us an example of a community where traditionally every year one member of the community is chosen to be sacrificed, and it is not explained at all how the tradition came to be. It is also not discussed why this is necessary for the community's greater good. And the members of the particular community that is given as an example is showing that they're compliant with the tradition. There is a little insert of some questioning the tradition of the lottery, and there are rumors that in some communities they no longer participate in the sacrificing of a human once a year, but most of the members of the community seem to be conforming with the tradition. They do it because they've always done it. So the sacrifice is shown at the end, and they stone a person to death. So the family of the one who's chosen to be sacrificed also partakes in the stoning of their loved one. So this story was perceived with much shock once it was published, and many people saw it as the criticism of the obligatory military draft that was happening at the time. And this story can be extended to many other traditions, because anytime I discuss the story with anyone, the main question arises is, why did these people continue being compliant with the murder of an individual on a yearly basis? And this is the question that many traditions beg. Why do we continue doing something even though we perceive it as harmful, even if we don't like it anymore? If we don't see any sense in it, why do we continue doing that? And this is something that I think every one of us should practice on a pretty much a daily basis. We need to question why we do what we do, why we feel like we have to do certain things a certain way. And sometimes after examination, we will discover that it makes sense to do certain things in a certain way. It makes sense to celebrate some holidays. It's a good thing to get together with family and spend time together and reflect calmly on the past year. However, does it have to happen in a certain way or form? Well, the obvious answer is no. So Fromm, in his book, The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, which I mentioned on a few occasions already, Fromm uses the example of an experiment where conformity has been tested and the human predisposition towards violence as well. And this experiment has become very famous because they had some people perform a task of a teacher and a person who would punish the students. And the students were given questions, and every time they answered incorrectly, the teacher was supposed to electrocute them using a button. And there was also another person who was conducting the experiment who would encourage the teacher to carry on with the punishment. And the more mistakes the student made, the more severe the punishment got. So they were doing this to see when the person who's the teacher would stop punishing the student. They wanted to see just how much time and pressure it took to see when the people would stop imposing violence on another. And the experiment gave some surprising results. Very few people completely refused to partake in the increasing of the painful stimulus towards the student. Some did, and some did continue very reluctantly. And most of the participants showed great distress, especially as the pain levels supposedly rose for the student. The interpretation Mr. Fromm gives for this experiment is not necessarily dealing with conformity, but dealing with the fact that when a person is socially pressured by the figures of authority, in this case, the experimenter being present in the room, are very unlikely to resist. And this is because we humans are very highly social. So we are used to following instructions and orders, and we are used to blindly believing the figures of authority and thinking, well, they know better, they are in charge. A similar thing happens with traditionalism. So we very rarely are taught to question the status quo. We may continue certain practices by default, thinking that, well, everyone else is doing that, why not me? But I do believe there is much value in critical analysis of everything. I think we should very closely examine everything that is proposed to us or offered to us. Only then will we be able to assume responsibility for our own lives, and only then we can claim that we are independent thinkers.